Okay, good morning. So nice to see all of you. The challenge of this period of time we find ourselves in, the challenge of the 3 weeks and Tisha B'Av, is to make it meaningful, to feel pain, to feel a real sense of loss for something that took place almost 2,000 years ago. The Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, seems so foreign. The Avodah, the service in the temple, so ancient. And maybe, chas v'shalom, heaven forbid, even anachronistic. How could we feel a real sense of loss for something we never knew, something we never saw, something we never experienced? How do we experience the Churban? How do we make it real, tangible, relevant? How do we access that pain? There's a famous Chassidish Vort that expresses this very struggle. The question is asked, why is the day called Tisha B'Av? Now, Av, aside from being, of course, the name of the month, means what? Father. What is significant about the number 9? 9 months of pregnancy. Tisha Yarchei Leida. Tisha Yarchei Leida. So this Chassidish Vort says that Tisha B'Av can be understood to mean 9 months by the Av, by the father. Just as the father has no idea what's going on with his wife, just as the father can't relate to the pain that his wife is going through, to what she's experiencing during the 9 months of pregnancy, so too we have trouble relating to the pain of the Churban. That's why it's called Tisha B'Av. And it's funny because it's true. The Gemara, towards the end of Masechet Ta'anit and Daf Lamed, describes how on Erev Tisha B'Av, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai would sit and they would bring him some stale bread, some dry bread to eat with some salt, and he would sit ben tanur l'kirayim. Rashi says the most disgusting place in the house. He would sit, in the utility room between the stove and the furnace. The ochel v'shoteh, and he would eat and he would drink, and he would just have this little kiton shel mayim that he would drink. V'domeh, the Gemara continues and relates that he appeared k'mish shemeto mutal lefanav, as someone who has a dead relative lying in front of him. This is technical language that the Mishnah uses to describe someone who is an onen, someone who has just lost one of his close relatives before burial. Mish shemeto mutal lefanav. For Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, the pain was so imminent. The pain was immediate. Now you could argue, okay, but Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai lived closer to the Churban. He witnessed it. How do we relate? How do we connect? How do we feel a real sense of loss for something we never saw, something we never knew, something we never experienced? So there are a number of ways, of course, in which we attempt to make the Churban relevant. One is the Nehugei Avelut, the customs of mourning that we observe leading up to Tisha B'Av and on the day itself. Different minhagim or nihugei avelut. The Gemara describes the difference between avelut chadasha, new mourning, when one loses a karov, a close relative. No one needs to tell them how to feel, to experience pain. The pain is real, it's heavy. Versus avelut yeshana, the Gemara contrasts that with old avelut, mourning for something that took place a long time ago, in which we need to sensitize ourselves. So, of course, Ashkenazim observe 3 weeks already from the 17th of Tammuz, from the fast of Shiva Sar Tammuz, and as we approach Tisha B'Av, the customs of mourning get more intense and more intense until Tisha B'Av itself. And Rav Soloveitchik compared this to Avelut Chadasha, whereas Avelut Chadasha, a person experiences different steps or stages in the mourning process when the pain is raw, and the mourning customs, or the customs of mourning, the Nehugei Avelut, they are intense and they begin to ease up over time. So Rav Soloveitchik said it's the opposite. It parallels Avelut Chadasha, but with Avelut Yeshana, you have to go la'at, slowly, from light customs of mourning, 3 weeks, right? Then you have the 9 days, and you have Shavua Shechal B'Tisha B'Av, till the day itself. As we progress towards Tisha B'Av, the customs of mourning become more intense and more intense. So it's the opposite. That's how Rav Soloveitchik understood it. And he makes parallel between the customs of mourning by Avelut Chadasha versus Avelut Yeshana, and showed how they're really a mirror image. They're the inverse. Another way that we relate to the Churban is by evoking or invoking more recent tragedies in Jewish history. If you look at the keynote, for example, you find that we invoke the Crusades of 1096 and the burning of the Talmud in France in 1242 and pogroms throughout Jewish history. And we've added keynote for the Holocaust. And very recently, some have even added a kinah for the expulsion from Gush Katif. And what's incredible is that most of the keynote themselves don't directly deal with the Churban. It's much broader. Our pain transcends time. It's the story of Jewish history. Tisha B'Av is, after all, the day when we mourn all of our national tragedies and calamities throughout Jewish history. And in doing so, we make the pain of the day relevant. I may have a hard time relating to the Churban Beit HaMikdash. It happened so long ago, but I can relate to the Shoah. I can relate to the Holocaust. And through that, we access the pain of the Churban. Through that, we can connect to a real sense of loss. Making Tisha B'Av meaningful is a challenge for Am Yisrael wherever they are. But I think it's especially challenging for those of us living here in Eretz Yisrael. How can we truly mourn the destruction of Yerushalayim when, just look around, Yerushalayim today is not in a state of Churban. It's a place of tremendous binyan and hitpatchut, building and growth and development. After 2,000 years, we've returned to our home. Her children have returned to her borders. You know? Like the fiery phoenix rising from the ashes of gas chambers and crematoria, the Jewish people returned to their soil and built a state. We witnessed the restoration of a land and a people. Ashrei ayin ra'at hazot. If you look up today in Jerusalem, wherever you are, you'll see Israel's national bird, the crane. It's a joke, building crane. You're all on mute, so I can't hear the billowing of laughter, but I trust that you all got my joke. You walk through the shuk and you see the tremendous shefa, the bounty, the blessings. Everywhere you try to drive, there's traffic as Jerusalem is constantly being dug up to expand the light rail. And so much Torah is being studied and taught. You can't escape the feeling that the prophecy, the Nevuah of Zechariah, has come true, that elderly men and women once again sit in the streets of Jerusalem and boys and girls play in her streets. These are my children and your children, and Navi is describing. My first Tisha B'Av here, 11 years ago, as an Olech Hadash, I participated in something called the Sivuv Sharim. I trust that some of you are familiar with it. The Sivuv Sharim is an event that's organized each year by the Women in Green. It begins with a reading of Megillat Eicha in Gan HaAtzmaut across from the US Embassy. And as I recall, 11 years ago, after some jabs at the new Obama administration, we set off under heavy police escort for a walk around the gates of the old city of Jerusalem. A heavy police escort, many young Muslim men came out to see what was going on, to watch us. And the participants, the marchers, were waving flags. There were Israeli flags there. And there were political slogans. And we stopped every so often, I think at each gate, for some sort of politically charged speech. And it made me uncomfortable. It was unlike any Tisha B'Av that I had experienced. There was a feeling of triumph, of victory, of sovereignty as we marched around the gates of the old city. But this was Tisha B'Av. And it felt wrong. I was used to sitting on the ground, on the floor of a darkened synagogue in stillness and contemplative silence. It just didn't feel right. And I began to ask myself, how should we feel on Tisha B'Av here in Jerusalem? How should we experience Tisha B'Av in the state of Israel? So this morning, I'd like to explore together with you the question of how we mourn the Churban, the destruction of Jerusalem, in a rebuilt Jerusalem. And I'd like to frame our discussion by looking together with you at a case study, at the Tefillah of Nachem, in which we insert into the Amidat Mincha on Tisha B'Av, and a debate that took place following the Six-Day War concerning changes that were made by some to the text of Nachem to reflect the new reality of Jewish sovereignty over Jerusalem. So I'll put some sources up on the screen for all of you to take a look at together with me. I trust everyone can see the sources. Okay, if you take a look at the paragraph to your right, to the right of the page, you'll see the tefillah of Nachem, again, which we add to the Amidah at Mincha on Tisha B'Av, and the traditional text of Nachem. This additional prayer describes Yerushalayim as a city that's in sorrow, that's laid waste, that's scorned, and that's desolate, that grieves of her children, laid waste of her dwellings, robbed of her glory, etc., etc., etc. And this is the nusach that appears in most Ashkenazic Sidurim. As we'll get to in a moment, we'll see the origins of it, but it's pretty much based on the text as it appears in the Rosh, the Rabbeinu Osher. Let's take a look at it together with me. Nachem Hashem Elokeinu et avilei Tzion ve'et avilei Yerushalayim. Mincha, when the tone of the day begins to shift from mourning to consolation, we add this prayer where we ask Hashem to console the mourners of Tzion. Hashem, our God, console the mourners of Tzion and the mourners of Jerusalem. Ve'et ha'ir ha'avila v'hachariva v'bzuya v'shomima. This is, as I said, how we describe Yerushalayim, how this tefillah describes Yerushalayim, the city that's in sorrow, laid waste, scorned, and shomema, desolate. Ha'avela mibli banea. She is in mourning. She grieves the loss of her children. She doesn't have children. She doesn't have her children there. Ve'hechareva me'onoteha. V'bzuya mikvoda. Right? And she is laid waste of her dwellings, of her high places. She is robbed of her glory, of her kavod, of her honor. V'ashomima me'en yoshev. And she sits there without any inhabitants. She's desolate. She's empty with no inhabitants. She's, again, scorned and laid waste and destroyed and empty. Okay, and the tefillah continues. V'yoshevet v'rosha chafui ki isha kara shelo yalada. She sits with her head covered, which is, of course, a sign of mourning, like a childless woman, like a barren woman that has not bore any children. So this is the description of Yerushalayim as it appears in the traditional version of Nachem that appears in most Sidurim and that we're all familiar with. And the question, of course, is this accurate today? Is Jerusalem indeed empty? I mean, with over 500,000 Jewish residents in the city of Jerusalem, is this description correct? Are these words appropriate? Is Jerusalem empty of its inhabitants, and is she like a motherless child, or have her children returned to her? Again, is this tefillah appropriate, considering the new reality, okay, the current reality? So that, of course, is our question. And to make things more difficult, we're not allowed to speak inaccuracies or even lies in our tefillot. Our tefillot have to be truthful and accurate. One's not permitted to lie in tefillah. So how do we reconcile this accepted nusach with our current reality? Jerusalem's not desolate without inhabitants today, not laid waste. As I described, Jerusalem is teeming with life. Her skies are lined with new buildings. The city continues to grow by leaps and bounds every day. Until this whole Corona thing happened, I used to travel very often and speak in different communities around the world, and I would always be surprised coming back, from the airport. I'd be in the Nesher, the Hasa, or the taxi, and I'd look around and I'd say, when did they put up this building? Wow, look at this new construction. Jerusalem is teeming with life. Her skies are lined with new buildings. You see Israel's national bird, the crane, the building crane, everywhere you go. So how do we reconcile this tefillah with our current reality? Okay. So it's interesting. If you take a look here at the paragraph to the left of the column here, on the left side of your page, this is the tefillah as it appears in the Yerushalmi, and this is the source for Nachem. Okay, here I put the Yerushalmi in the fourth parak of Masechet Brachot. There's a parallel passage in the Yerushalmi to Masechet Ta'anit. Okay, Amar Rabbi Acha bar Yitzchak b'shem Rabbi Chia de Tziporin. Rabbi Acha, the son of Yitzchak, said in the name of Rabbi Chia of Tzipori, Yachid b'Tisha B'Av tzarich lahazkir me'ein ha'me'ora. Okay, an individual on Tisha B'Av must make mention of me'ein ha'me'ora, of the events of the day, just like we make mention of when it's Rosh Chodesh, we say Al Hanisim, we add Ya'alev Yavo. Excuse me, when it's Rosh Chodesh, we add Ya'alev Yavo. When it's Purim or Chanukah, we add Al Hanisim. We mention the events of the day, the Inyana Dioma, the Me'ein HaMe'ora. Okay, Ma'u Omer, what does he say? Interesting, the tefillah as it appears in the Yerushalmi, which is the source for this practice, begins Rachem. You're asking Hashem not for consolation, not to console us, but you're asking Hashem for mercy, to have mercy upon Yerushalayim. Rachem Hashem Elokeinu, Berachamecha harabim, uvechasadecha hane'emanim aleinu ve'al amcha Yisrael ve'al Yerushalayim ircha ve'al Tzion mishkan kibotecha. You're asking Hashem to have mercy, abundant mercy, great kindness. Have mercy upon us, upon your nation Israel, upon Jerusalem, your city, upon Zion, your dwelling place, ve'al ha'ir, and on the city, ha'avela, ve'hachareva, ve'haharusa, ve'hashomema. And on the city that is in mourning, that is destroyed, that is uprooted, and that is desolate. So it's interesting. If you take a look at the actual source for tefillah, the description of Jerusalem there is much more brief and much more subtle. Okay, if you compare it to what we just read, it's a much shorter description of Jerusalem's degradation and Jerusalem's mourning. And then the tefillah continues, it's given into the hands of foreigners, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so that is the text as it appears in the Talmud Yerushalmi. And following the dramatic events of 1967, the unification of Jerusalem, the reclamation of the Temple Mount, Rav Shlomo Goren, then chief rabbi of the IDF, made changes to the Nusach of Nachem to reflect the new reality of a unified Jerusalem under Jewish sovereignty. I'll just mention, by the way, it's interesting that that the tefillah here, as we saw in the Yerushalmi, is Rachem. Its identity is Rachem, have mercy. And in fact, the Yerushalmi doesn't tell us when you should add this to the tefillah, right? Is it added to the tefillah at Mincha, as we do, or should it be added to all the tefillot on Tisha B'Av? Right? It's not clear, which is interesting. And there were communities, by the way, who added Rachem to each and every tefillah of Tisha B'Av. They said it at Arvit, they said it at Shacharit, and at Mincha, as we do with the Me'ein HaMorah, Ya'alev Yavo, Al Hanisim, which we mentioned. And over time, the custom develops to say it at Mincha. Okay, so one possible explanation is that over time, as the tefillah morphs, goes through these gilgulim, goes through these incarnations and changes and becomes Nachem, so then maybe it's appropriate to say it only at Mincha, when I've explained the customs of mourning begin to ease. All of a sudden, we sit up on a chair or a bench, and you put your tefillin on at mincha, right? And the tone of the day shifts from mourning to consolation, to Nachem. All of a sudden at mincha, we can speak of nechama. So that's one possible explanation why we only say it at mincha. But I point this out because it's interesting. The tefillah itself has gone through changes, and that's important. It's important. Here we're careful not to change any word of our tefillot. We'll touch on in a moment, but you see that the tefillah itself went through a number of incarnations, and first it was called Rachem, and it's not clear when exactly you should add it. So some explain that perhaps once the tefillah changes to Nachem, all of a sudden the custom develops to say it only at mincha when the focus shifts to one of nechama. I'll just mention as an aside, another interesting little nekuda, little point is that maybe it was also meant to be inserted into the birkat hamazon, into benching for one who, let's say, is sick and will be eating during Tisha B'Av, and maybe he has an obligation. It's a rich discussion. Maybe he has an obligation to make mention of the day on Tisha B'Av if he is indeed eating, if he has to say Birkat HaMazon because he has to eat. So maybe he has an obligation to make mention of the Me'ein HaMe'orah, the Inyan Diyoma, the day, in which case maybe this was composed, again, the tefillah that was known as Rachem to be inserted in the bracha of Rachem, the third bracha of Birkat HaMazon, Boneh Bracha Mav Yerushalayim Amen, which begins Rachem. So that's another interesting point that some point out. But as I mentioned, following the dramatic events, the miraculous events of June 1967, the dramatic reclamation of Yerushalayim and the Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount, Rav Goren, who was then the chief rabbi of the IDF, made changes to this tefillah to reflect this new reality of a unified Jerusalem under Jewish sovereignty. And in the Sidur that he edited and published in 1970, I put it on the source sheets. Take a look at what he writes. Okay, if you scroll down with me here in Dinei Tisha B'Av, this, by the way, is the Sidur that I found at the National Library from Tafshin Lamed Aleph, that was edited and published by Rav Goren, chief rabbi of the IDF, whose whole persona is so much tied in with that period and with the dramatic events of June 1967. It says here, Sidur Tfilot L'Chayalei Tzahal, and notice it's Nusach Achid. Rav Goren tried to create one unifying Nusach to join all of the Jewish people together. Unfortunately, like a lot of his beautiful ideas, it was never really accepted. Okay, but he tried. The old question is, well, nusach achid, you can make one nusach for everyone, but whose nusach? Which nusach? Right? It was mostly nusach Sfard, which I have no complaints against because that's my minhag. Okay, so here you see Harabanut Hatzva'it Harashit, the rabbinate of the IDF. Okay, so this is the frontispiece or daf hashar, sharblat of that Sidur. And here on page 69, he writes Dinei Tisha B'Av, okay, and gives for the soldiers a review of the laws of Tisha B'Av and the tefillot, etc. And look here where I put a little star. He writes the following: Hanusach HaMasorti, the traditional nusach of Nachem, Hamiyuchas Lo Rosh, which appears in the Rosh, in his commentary to the Talmud, Hamidaber al ha'ir habezuya v'shomima ha'avela mibli banea v'chareva mimonotea, etc., etc., etc. The long, verbose description that we have in the traditional nusach, the accepted nusach, which appears in our Sidurim, which describes Jerusalem as desolate, as empty, as destroyed, and she's childless and she's barren. There's no one living there. So look where I've underlined. Rav Goren writes, Eino holem. It's not appropriate. Ka'asher Yerushalayim mishuchreret v'nimtzeit b'shilton Yisrael. That description is not appropriate when Jerusalem is freed, is ours, and is under Israel's sovereignty, is under Jewish sovereignty. that description is no longer applicable. Lachein, he continues, therefore, b'charnu b'nusach shoneh l'tfilat Nachem. Therefore, we've chosen a different nusach. We've made changes to the nusach. Hamivusas al nusach haTalmud Yerushalmi, which is based on the Jerusalem Talmud, which we just saw together, and the Sidur, the nusach as it appears in the Sidur of Rav Amram Gaon and the Rambam, also Rav Sadia Gaon. B'hashmatat haktaim, with leaving out, right, the sections or the descriptions, hanirim kibilti matimim ka'et, which appear to be not inappropriate nowadays with this new reality of Jerusalem under Jewish sovereignty. Okay, with a Jerusalem that is teeming with life. And so if you take a look at the bottom of the sheet, here I put the text as it appears, the Sidur that Rav Goren composes and edits. Nachem Hashem Elokeinu et Avelit Zion ve'et Aveli Yerushalayim. And he limits the description to really just three words. Ve'et ha'ir ha'avela ha'chareva ve'ha'harusa. The city that is mourning and that is destroyed. Okay. No description of a city that is desolate because her children have returned to her city. No description of a childless, barren woman because that's not reality. So Rav Goren wasn't the only one to make changes to this tefillah. There were others. You had, for instance, Professor Ephraim Elimelech Urbach. He belonged to a group of religious professors that considered doing away with Tisha B'Av Bichlal, by the way. They felt that the day itself just wasn't relevant anymore. We'll talk about that Be'ezrat Hashem next week. But Rav Goren wasn't the only one who suggested changes to Nachem to adapt it to the current reality. But it was the changes that Rav Goren made that stirred a major machloket haposkim and really spun a flurry of articles, of tshuvot, of letters in the newspaper Hatzofeh, which was the religious Zionist newspaper, the predecessor to Makor Rishon. And many poskim of the day weighed in on this issue. Rav Chaim David Halevi, who served as chief rabbi of Tel Aviv and was a very important posek. He wrote many sfarim and tshuvot. So he writes in the first volume of Asel Harav, he agreed that some changes needed to be made to the current, present text as we have it. But he suggested more subtle changes, changing the text from present tense to past tense, and replacing the city that is in sorrow with the city that was in sorrow. Or she sits with her head covered to she sat with her head covered. So he suggested making some subtle changes, but changes nonetheless. Rav Isser Yehuda Unterman, who was at the time the Ashkenazic chief rabbi of the state of Israel during the Six-Day War, he opposed any changes to the text of Nachem because he said, look around, the old city of Yerushalayim is filled with Batei Knesset, with synagogues, in all sorts of states of destruction and disrepair. Right? Remember, for decades, you had the Churva Shul, which shortly after we made Aliyah 11 years ago, was rededicated, rebuilt completely and rededicated and restored to its former glory. But during Rav Unterman's day, the old city was not what it is today. And he said, look around, you have all sorts of synagogues in various states of destruction and disrepair. At the same time, the old city, the holy city of Jerusalem, is full of churches and mosques. So Rav Unterman was uncomfortable with any changes to Tfilat Nachem because he felt the descriptions of Yerushalayim that appear in Nachem are still very true and very relevant. Ravad Yosef opposed any changes to Nachem. And he gave two reasons. Now, Ravad Yosef was really a bar plukta with Rav Goren. They served as chief rabbis at the same time. And they butted heads often. Oftentimes they did not see eye to eye. And Rav Ovadia said, you can't make changes to Nachem for two reasons. Number one, our tefillot were composed by the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. And he felt we don't have the authority to make any changes to the text. Now, you'll ask, but wait a minute, was Nachem composed by the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah? It would seem that Nachem comes much later, but in case, Rav Ovadia felt that the tefillot, as we have them, as we've received them, they are, sacrosanct, and who are we to touch them? And number two, Rav Ovadia felt that the traditional text of Nachem is relevant even today, considering the physical and spiritual degradation of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. And he writes in Tshuva, in the first volume of Yechavedat, it's Yechavedat Chelek Aleph, Siman Mem Gimel, he writes, Ube'emet, שגם לפי פשוטו יתבאר הנוסח של תפילת נחם. If you look at just the simple text of the accepted traditional liturgy as we have received it, it describes Yerushalayim shu al har Tzion sheshamem sholim hilchu bo. It describes a situation where the Temple Mount is desolate, and as we have in Eicha, foxes trespass, traipse on the Temple Mount, and he writes, "Ki makom hamikdash tzvivotav bitunim biad zarim sonei Yisrael." When Rav Ovadia is writing this tshuva, he writes, "Look, the makom hamikdash, the place where the Holy Temple stood, the Har HaBayit, and its environs is under the control of foreigners who are sonei Yisrael, who hate the Jewish people." Right? By then already, that famous battle cry of Matagur that is so tied up with the experience of the 6-day war, and that famous battle cry which is seared into our collective consciousness as Jews, Har HaBayit biyadenu. Today, and even in the days following the 6-day war, you could punctuate that battle cry with a question mark. Har HaBayit biyadenu. Question mark, is it really true? As very quickly the keys of Har HaBayit were handed over to the Waqf, as you all know. So that's something that Rav Ovadia is sensitive to. He says, maybe we should make changes to Nachem because redemption is not here yet. Let's not be so quick. These descriptions that talk about degradation, they are still very much true, Rav Ovadia felt. We are in a state of degradation. Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, is in a state of degradation. Look what goes on the Temple Mount. It was true back then when Rav Ovadia wrote these words, and it's perhaps even more true today. And he continues and writes about the spiritual degradation of Jerusalem and the state of Israel. He writes, Chinuch alafim v'revavot mi'aldei Yisrael lo Torah v'lo mitzvah. We've got education here in the state of Israel. He writes, hundreds of thousands of children are being taught, and they're not being taught Torah, they're not being taught mitzvot. Veheres chomat hatzniut v'hamusar, and there's this complete destruction of the walls of modesty and of ethics and musar, discipline. V'ribui chilul haShabbat, and so much Sabbath desecration. V'afarat sidrei hakashrut, and an upset to the laws of kashrut, to the law and order concerning kashrut. And of course, Rav Ovadia had a lot of experience in this as chief rabbi. V'od kahena ukahena, etc., etc., etc. Okay, and by the way, this is a theme in the tshuvot of Rav Ovadia Yosef, a theme in his thought and his piskei halacha. Rav Ovadia's lishitato, he often looks at the reality, the mitziut, and looks at the stark reality when ruling with regards to things related to halacha and medina, things related to halacha and the state of Israel. And so, for instance, he rules concerning Hallel on Yom HaAtzmaut, that one can say Hallel but should not say it with a bracha. And he gives many different reasons, but one of the reasons is, take a look at the physical and spiritual state of Israel today. Part of his cheshbon is the security situation, that we're constantly under attack, constantly face this existential threat, and also the spiritual state of the state of Israel. That this is not yet the final redemption. Okay, so he rules that you can say Hallel, but not without a bracha. Right? Hallel without a bracha. And again, part of his cheshbon is looking at the current situation. Also concerning reciting the bracha of Shechian on Yom HaAtzmaut, along these same lines. So that's a theme in the thought of Rav Ovadia. While Rav Ovadia certainly had very positive feelings towards the state of Israel, and felt that the founding of the state of Israel, the Hakamat HaMedina, is a miracle, and that one should give thanks to Hashem. But he was very cautious and often looked at the mitzvot, looked at the stark reality. And so here he feels it's not appropriate to make any changes to the traditional nusach of Nachem, given the current spiritual state of the state of Israel. Rav Soloveitchik also felt that we don't have the authority to make any changes to the text of Nachem. And he felt that the text is very much relevant even today. Kedarko Bakodesh, Rav Soloveitchik also was uncomfortable with making any changes or innovations in minhag or to Nesach HaTfilah. He was very conservative when it came to these newfangled ideas and to innovations. Even Yom HaAtzmaut, which Rav Soloveitchik celebrated, but he celebrated it in a very kind of moderate way. He was uncomfortable with a lot of the innovations to the Nusach HaTfilah for Yom HaAtzmaut. And same too here, Kedarko Bakodesh, Rav Soloveitchik L'shitato was uncomfortable with making changes to Nachem because he was always uncomfortable with making changes to Minhag or to Nusach HaTfilah. But Rav Soloveitchik went on to explain that according to the Rambam, Jerusalem shares the Kedusha of the Beit HaMikdash. We find in a number of places in his Perush HaMishnah, in the Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah, that the Rambam defines Mikdash not just as the temple confines or the temple mount, but the Rambam defines Mikdash, the concept of Mikdash, in the Mishnah as including Yerushalayim as well. And there are a number of nafkamina halacha, not for now. But based on this, Rav Soloveitchik argued that if the Mikdash is not standing, well, according to the Rambam, Mikdash includes Yerushalayim. So if we do not have a Mikdash, in the absence of a Mikdash, if a Mikdash is not standing, so certainly Yerushalayim can be described as being laid waste, scorned, and desolate. Okay, if a Beit HaMikdash is not standing, so surely these descriptions are appropriate to Yerushalayim as well. Again, Yerushalayim being included in the concept of Mikdash. Other poskim, like Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kohen Kook and Rav Shol Yisraeli, they opposed making any public changes to Nachem in the Tfilat HaTzibur, in the repetition of the Amidah, but they allowed for individuals to make these changes in their own silent Amidah. Okay, so they took a moderate approach. They said, we're not comfortable with public changes to the public Tfilah, but an individual can make these changes in his own personal Tfilah. Now, Rav Goren tried, unsuccessfully, to make these changes or to formally institute these changes later when he served as Ashkenazi chief rabbi of the state of Israel from 1973 to 1983. He tried to formally institute these changes, but it was unsuccessful. He had a lot of creative ideas. He was certainly a Dat Yachid and very, very unique, had a lot of wonderful chidushim and was very brave, but it just didn't catch on. And maybe aside from certain communities and from his Hasidim, who until this day, some of them continue to recite Nachem with the changes he made, the changes he made never really caught on. Now, what's interesting, what a lot of people don't know, is that Rav Goren himself would eventually change his mind about these changes to Nachem, after the initial euphoria of those early days post 6-Day War faded and gave way to a stark reality. In November 1978, Rav Goren wrote that due to the ethical, moral, and national decline following the Yom Kippur War, and in light of plans for land concessions to the Palestinians, he's retracting his ruling in favor of the traditional Nusach. Okay, this you can find in his Sefer Trumat HaGoren on pages 327 through 329. So Rav Goren himself changed his mind. He was chozer bo. He changed his mind. He retracted this ruling, and felt that the traditional tefillah of Nachem, as we have received it, captures the feeling, this feeling of helplessness, of emptiness that set in after those early days of euphoria began to fade. All of a sudden, he felt that this description is once again very much appropriate. This debate, which took place over the changes to Nachem, reflects this very real challenge that we face, how we mourn the Churban in a rebuilt Jerusalem. And I think that this tension, this dialectic, is similar to the very dialectic of Tisha B'Av itself. It's not so pashut. The day itself has a complex character. And this tension, this dialectic, is found in many different places in Yudic and Midrashic literature. And this is a theme that Rav Soloveitchik would often touch on, that there's a dialectic, a duality to Tisha B'Av itself. The day has a complex calendar. On the one hand, it's a day of tremendous mourning and pain and suffering, the day on which we mourn all of our national calamities and tragedies. But it's also, as you know, a day of hope and a day of consolation. And I'll just give a couple of examples. But the Gemara in Masechet Yomah on Daf Nun Daled describes that when the enemies entered into the temple, it's talking about the Churban Bayit Rishon, they found the Kruvim entangled in an embrace. They saw the Kruvim, either the Kruvim that appear on the Parochet, but more likely probably a description of the Kruvim on the ark itself, on the Kaporet, on the cover of the Holy Ark in the temple. And we know that the Pasuk describes how they are supposed to be made facing each other and facing the kaporet, facing the cover. And the question is, which one is it? So the Gemara says, well, it's not a stira, it's not a conflict or a problem, because when the Jewish people are doing the will of Hashem, they face one another. Okay, and when they are not doing the will of Hashem, they turn away from one another. That's what the Gemara elsewhere says. The Gemara here in Yoma and Daf Nun Daled describes how when they entered, they saw the Kruvim entangled in an embrace. That's the language there in the Gemara. Entangled in an embrace. And they exclaimed, these Jews whose blessing is a blessing and whose curse is a curse, they occupy themselves with such things. So obviously this imagery of the intimacy, the great love between God and the Jewish people was lost on them. But why, you can ask the question, during the destruction of the Holy Temple, were the angels entangled in an embrace, or were these Kruvim entangled in an embrace? Okay, so Tisha B'Av in the language of Chazal in Masechet Ta'anit is a day that is a yom of Bechia L'Dorot. It's a day that's set aside of crying for future generations, for all generations. It's called a Yom Chayav, a day that is obligated, so to speak, for punishment, a day when punishment is going to be meted out. It's a time of bad luck. The first half or the first part of the month of Av is considered a period of Raya Mazle. We have bad luck then. The Gemara says you should defer a court date to another time. It's a day, the Gemara in Masechet Rosh Hashanah says, Huchpilu Bot Sarot. We'll see that Gemara in Rosh Hashanah and Daf Yud Chet next week. A day when, we have a number of things happen, both first and second temples, right? Double tragedy. A number of tragedies happen on that day. The Rambam calls it a Yom Muchan L'Puranut, a day that's set aside for or designated for punishment. And you know that throughout Jewish history, Abravanel talks about this, and many others throughout Jewish history, there were many tragic events and calamities that took place either on or around Tisha B'Av. But at the same time, it's also the symbolic birthday of the Mashiach. Per the Yerushalmi Brachot, the second parak there, in Eicha Rabbah, the Medrash to Eicha. Tisha B'Av is referred to in the first chapter of Eicha as a moed, an appointed time, which has a number of meanings, but it can also refer to a festival. It has this connotation, and it's understood to express this idea that it's a festival. Some suggest that's why we don't say Tachanun on Tisha B'Av. There are other reasons as well. Like we don't say Tachanun, for instance, in the house of mourner. And we have a tradition that one day Tisha B'Av will be turned into a festival. Right? That's the Nevuah of Zechariah. That these 4 fasts that are associated with the destruction of the Holy Temple will one day be for the house of Yehudah, will be for the Jewish people, l'sason l'simcha, and that's how the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah Daf Yud Chet understands it. That these fasts will turn into feasts and will become festivals. It will be transformed into festivals. So Tisha B'Av will be celebrated. We're going to talk about that in depth next week. And every prophecy of destruction in our Tanakh, as Rav Soloveitchik would often point out, also contains words of hope and consolation. That is also an expression of this idea that while it is this Yom Mar, this bitter day, and a day of tragedy and calamity and pain and suffering, it's also a day of hope. It's expressed in the fact that each and every prophecy of destruction in Tanakh also contains some element of nechama as well. That's why, for example, on Tisha B'Av, you're allowed to read the Nevuot that describe destruction, but you're supposed to leave out the Nevuot that describe the hope and the consolation, because somehow that's not appropriate for Tisha B'Av, because focus needs to be on the pain. But every prophecy contains words of hope and consolation. Rav Soloveitchik also would point out that you find that Yerushalayim and Harabayit and the Makom HaMikdash, they never lose their Kedusha. Their Kedusha is forever. They were viewed with a Kedusha that can never become nullified. And that also is an expression of this concept of hope and consolation. And so even while the Holy Temple was being destroyed, these Kruvim, as is described in the Gemara in Yomah, these Kruvim were entangled in an embrace even while the temple was being destroyed, because Hashem was revealing his love and really consolation despite all the devastating destruction taking place all around. Okay, so Tisha B'Av is a complicated day. Right? It has this identity crisis. It has this complex character, this duality, or this dialectic. Soloveitchik saw it in the day itself, how you go from mourning in the morning, right, to at Mincha already, as we said before, some nechama. We add Nachem. Some of the customs of mourning begin to ease the second half of the day. And Rav Soloveitchik pointed out from the Gemara at the end of Masechet Tani that's dafka when the temple was burning. The temple was destroyed towards the end of the day. That's when they set fire to the Holy Temple. It's based on a pasuk that the Gemara draws on. So why do the customs of mourning begin to ease up? Right? The Shulchan Aruch says you could already start, preparing your breakfast meal towards the end of the day, and the customs of mourning begin to ease. How are the customs of mourning easing? That's dafka when the temple was set ablaze, and in fact, the Gemara there says that maybe it was a discussion. Maybe Tisha B'Av should have been observed the 10th of Av, or maybe both on the 9th and the 10th of Av. But Chazal chose to commemorate Tisha B'Av on the 9th when the destruction began. Atchalta de Puranut, the Gemara there says, the beginning of the destruction. That's when they chose or designated the day of fasting and mourning. But you know that some of the customs of mourning even continue into the 10th until Chatzot, right? So Rav Soloveitchik pointed to this conflict that, how do we understand this? That as the temple was set ablaze and as it's being destroyed at the end of the day, right? As the sun is setting, the Gemara describes, as the sun is setting, as the day is waning, and that's dafka when the temple is being destroyed. All of a sudden, the customs of mourning begin to ease up. Very, very share, very difficult. And what Rav Soloveitchik said, yeah, he pointed to a famous midrash that says that Hashem took out his anger, instead of destroying the Jewish people, he took it out on atzim and avanim, eitzim v'avonim. Took it out on sticks and stones, meaning on the physical edifice of the temple, but not on the Jewish people. The Jewish nation will live forever, for eternity. It was a promise that Hashem made with them. And so Rav Soloveitchik said it was as if the Jewish people, they could breathe a sigh of relief. And so you have this duality. On the one hand, there's destruction taking place, but also there's an element of hope that the Jewish people, we will go on. There's hope, there's consolation. Again, that was a theme that Rav Soloveitchik would often visit. So you see that Tisha B'Av is not so simple. It has a complex character. And so there I was at the Sivuv Shari, bothered by the atmosphere of triumph and victory and sovereignty. And I began to realize that maybe this, in a sense, embodies this dialectic of Tisha B'Av, this complex character. It's a bitter day, but it's also a day of hope. Right? And that, I think, is this conflict, this tension, this dialectic that you see in this machloket, haposkim, in this debate and dispute concerning Nachem. And I think that one of the ways we can access the emotional experience necessary on Tisha B'Av, one of the ways we can make it relevant, one of the ways we can feel a real sense of loss here in the state of Israel in 5780, in 2020, now, is by recognizing just where we are. That, yes, something profound happened in 1948 with the Hakamat Medina, that after 2,000 years of exile, the Jewish people have returned to their borders. We've returned home, but things are far from perfect. There's an existential threat from within, from without. Sinat Chinam. We are so splintered, so much hatred. Israel is constantly delegitimized and demonized in the media. There's so much anti-Semitism worldwide. And we recognize that we've come so far, but it hasn't come easy. It hasn't been given to us on a silver platter. We've paid a heavy price. We've sacrificed, and we continue to sacrifice. I think, maybe one of the ways we can access that pain and feel a sense of loss and mourning for Tisha B'Av here in Israel, here in the rebuilt Jerusalem, is by recognizing where we are. Yes, how far we've come. Yes, the wonders and miracles, but recognize that we're still very far. It's interesting, in the tefillah for the Medina, the tefillah l'shlom Medina, the prayer for the welfare of the state of Israel, we describe this nascent nation, this young country, and it's very young. We describe it as Reshit Tzmichat Geulateinu, the first flowering of our redemption. We don't say it's redemption. We don't even say it's the beginning of redemption. We say it's the first flowering. It's a tip-tipa. It's just a drop. It's just a first step in the process. And I think this gap between where we are, right, recognizing, Baruch Hashem, all the wonders and miracles, but where we are and where we can be, where we have to go, how distant we still are. The fact that we don't have a holy temple, the fact that we don't have achdut, there's sinat chinam, the fact that Israel is constantly demonized and delegitimized in the international community, the fact that there's so much anti-Semitism. I think if we recognize, yes, all the wonders and miracles, but how far we still are, that's one way we can access that pain, by focusing on that gap, realizing that we've come a long way, but we're still far from our goal. We're still not there yet. The Talmud Yerushalmi says that every generation that does not see the building of the temple in its day, it's as if they themselves have destroyed it. I think it's very relevant today. Baruch Hashem, we've witnessed a rebuilding of Jerusalem, but not yet a rebuilding of the Holy Temple. So there's still something missing there. And some of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, what are we missing? Where do we need to go? What do we need to be? How do we get there? How can we actualize our national potential? Do we have a shared vision? What are our goals as a people? These are just some of the things I think we can reflect on during Tisha B'Av to make the day meaningful. May we merit to mourn properly and see the fulfillment of the promise of our sages. Kol hamitabel al Yerushalayim zocheh v'ro'eh b'simchata. Those who mourn for Jerusalem will merit to witness her in her joy. May we merit to mourn properly, to feel a real sense of pain, a sense of loss, to feel that we're missing something. And may we merit to see the building of the Beit HaMikdash with the Geulah Shlema, the complete redemption. B'mehera v'yameinu amen. I will unmute all participants and take any questions. Okay. Participants are unmuted.
Hello?
Oh, someone pointed out in the chat, I'll just read. Achituv Gershinsky wrote, is the machloket between Rav Ovadia and Rav Gorin indicative of the machloket between those who see the missing empty, half-empty glass as opposed to those who saw the existing half-full glass signs of the renaissance of Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael? I think you can suggest that, perhaps, in the, as I said, in the analysis of what Rav Ovadia writes here, and consistent with what he writes in other tshuvot. And yes, he seems to look at the reality, at the mitziyut, and see that things are not yet, we're not yet in the redemptive state where we're ready to sing Hallel with a bracha just yet, or we're ready to change the nusach of the tefillah of Nachem. Yeah, perhaps that's one way of looking at this debate between Rav Ovadia and Rav Ovadia. Okay, Tehila Koritz writes, thank you. Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, but we find also, like, during the destruction of both Beis Hamikdash, many people died, and also, like, throughout history, we have been persecuted. So Hashem is actually taking His anger on us.
Absolutely, absolutely, and the keynote, the tefillot and the keynote of the day reflect that and express that. But for many people, it's difficult to connect with that feeling, to feel that sense of loss and pain. You're absolutely right. And that's why, as I mentioned, we evoke and invoke all of these things that happen throughout Jewish history in the keynote. However, for many people, it's difficult to feel a real sense of loss on Tisha B'Av, especially, look out your window and see what's going on in Jerusalem, Baruch Hashem. I mean, look, you could argue that maybe this year, especially, we have what to reflect on concerning all the pain and suffering and the loss of the Corona situation. Maybe that gives us even more pause. But for many people, it's difficult to relate to those feelings. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, have a wonderful day. We'll see you all next week. Be'ezrat Hashem.
Thank you very much. I found it very enlightening, and now I can understand why my friends refer to it as Eretz Yisrael and not Medinat Yisrael. But I still feel to show thankfulness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that to continue to refer to it as Medinat Yisrael and continue to mourn the loss of the Beit HaMikdash. And we'll get there one day, Bezrat Hashem.
We will get there one day. Thank you, Chava. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, be well. All the best. Have a great week.